The next thing we're going to look at is the residual statistics output. So what this is going to do is it's going to give you a snapshot of how well your regression model's fitting the data and whether the residuals behave about as expected. So let's go through each one of these. So the predicted value first is going to tell you the general range and spread of the model's predictions. So having a mean here first of 2.75, this is the average GPA predicted by your model, minimum and the maximum. So the minimum being a 1.32 to 4.27. So the model predicts GPA values within this range. Anything below 1.2 or 1.3, excuse me. So like a 1.2, for example, is not going to be in the predicted value. Anything above 4.27 is not going to be as well. And then the standard deviation of 0.47 is the predicted values largely have a moderate spread around the mean. So the fact that it's a predicted mean of 2.75 with a range all the way from 1.3 to 4.27, standard deviation saying that 66% of all predicted values are going to be plus or minus 0.47 from the mean of 2.74 or 2.75. And then the N is going to tell you the number of observations we have. That's across the board. So the second thing now we have is the residual. So the residual mean of 0 is actually an excellent result. What this tells us is ultimately our residual should average out to 0 if the model is unbiased. So we can assume now we have an unbiased model, and that's an assumption that we need to check off. What then we see too is minimum residual minus 3.22 versus maximum 1.88. So the biggest under prediction was off by 3.22 GPA points, which is very extreme. And the largest over prediction was by 1.88. So saying that you were off by 3.2 points says that there was some observation in here where the prediction was like, call it 1.0, when in fact it was 4.22. So that tells us more or less the extreme of it did a lot more missing from high to low than low to high, which is just the assessment that we need to make. And then the standard deviation, the typical size of the prediction error is about 0.82 points. So that large negative residual suggests one or more outliers where the model drastically underpredicted a student's GPA. So we might go in and look, maybe z-score the data and run the model again when we remove any extreme outliers that we might want to control for. The third thing is the standardized predicted values. So with a mean of 0, standard deviation of 1, this says that the z-scores that are predicted values standardized, and then the max from minus 3.21. So it says that most predicted scores fall within plus or minus 3 standard deviations, which is good. So we really don't have, but it's ultimately telling us is we don't have all that many outliers across the board. And then finally, the standardized residual. So with the mean of 0 and a standard deviation here of about 1, what this is telling us is it's a standardized version of residuals with a min-max of minus 3.9 to 2.28. But one residual is nearly 4 standard deviations from the mean. So ultimately what this is telling us is a standardized residual beyond plus or minus 3 is usually considered a potential outlier. So we have at least one case well beyond this range, which may warrant a closer look, which is actually what we got out of our standardized predicted value as well. So what do we want to take away from this? The residuals are centered around 0 and normally distributed overall, so that's a good thing. Very few extreme residuals suggesting potential outliers or high leverage points that we might want to look into. And then the model makes predictions in realistic GPA range, though some large errors exist. But for the most part, we can feel pretty comfortable about what our error terms are telling us about how well our model actually performed. Despite the R-square being not significant, I would call it moderate level at 0.25. We ultimately see that our residuals look pretty good and our errors are not all over the place, which is a good thing to know.